All right, folks. I think that there are a couple of you who are here in the chat. I was able to. Well, I'm still actually kind of dealing with some of my camera issues, so I I had to switch to another computer of mine. That's why you kind of see me from a different angle this evening, folks. Um, let's see here. Let me get the message out. Give me 1 second. If you are in the chat or if you are from my class and you are tapped in, give me a thumbs up in the group chat. All right. Looks like Jaden is here. And I also see Miss Eisel. Okay. There we go. I'm just sending out text messages to the Slack. Yeah, sorry, folks. So, I have no clue what the heck is going on with my usual suspect computer, but thank you all for joining me this evening. I have a lot of updates that I need to share with you all, and I think once I actually get these messages out there, we'll probably have more folks joining us. Give me a thumbs up if you all received a text message from me right now on Slack. It's kind of weird, trying to find out what's the best kind of central mode of communication. That's why I ended up actually creating a Slack because I figured that I might be able to wrangle everybody, at least in my class, on their cell phones. And so it might actually be a little bit easier for them that way. See it in the general chat? Yeah, that's exactly where I dropped it. That goes out to all my classes. You know what would also help? If I put the link in there. All right. There we go. Okay, folks. So last thing I will do is I will try to make a new announcement. Okay. Here we go. Oops. All right. Okay. So it looks like I was able to actually get one announcement up and out. Make sure to get the rest. 84, 85. Okay. Another one. Okay. Yep. Yeah, Isla, I'm actually dropping these messages here on Canvas right now. Um, tell me in the chat, which do you all receive notifications for on Canvas? Do you receive a notification if I make an announcement, or do you receive a notification if I send like a general class inbox message? Which do you receive a notification for? Both. Okay. 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 Fair. So did you all? Oh, cool. Excellent. Excellent. Hi, Leslie. How you doing? Um, very cool to see a new face, a new name kind of pop up. Um, I get the announcement and inbox messages on my email. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So I am posting these announcements right now. Give me a thumbs up if you just received an announcement from me, like within the last 2 minutes. Okay. Alkaline. Hello. Perfect, Isel. Excellent. Yes. So good. Yes. I'm so glad that y'all are actually able to kind of fill me in on that, because you never know. On the professor's side, we don't get to see the notifications that you all see. So, like for example, when I send you out like a notification or an announcement in advance, like when I schedule it in advance, I see it. Okay, Tony, love the uniqueness. Um, when I send you a scheduled announcement, then I actually get a notification on my emails. Uh, but right now, when I like kind of post an announcement that's live, that's not scheduled, I don't actually see the notification. There's no email notification on my end. So I have no clue what it is that you all might be seeing out there in the YouTubes slash internets. Um, yeah, it's so weird. Manuel, what's up? I see you. Okay, there we go. All right, cool, great. So it looks like we it somehow, some way, by whatever manner and whatever means, these messages are actually coming to you all, and I am glad with that. Let's go ahead on and get started. Welcome you all to another edition of Inside the Class with CAG. I am your friendly neighborhood professor, swinging through the hallways, highways, and byways of a local YouTube land near you, or sometimes through the Zoom Boom Room. You never know. I'm everywhere like air, folks. Tonight, we have a very special agenda that we're going to actually get started with right now without further ado. I do want to actually, for the folks who are watching this on a recording, um, you all can follow along in Canvas. Um, Maybe you can like kind of open up two separate windows. I really wouldn't open like kind of two separate tabs. Sometimes I'll share my screen and you can follow along with me, which works better for you to kind of mirror me in another window on the side. So if you kind of do like maybe a little bit of a split screen action, it might be the best way to actually view this video here. Okay, folks. If you are watching me live, then there's any number of ways that you all could actually watch. You could watch it on your phone and then be on your computer, or you could actually do the split screen thing, like I just mentioned, or you could have two different monitors all together. It's live, so you never can tell what the heck is going to happen, right? So, part of what I want to actually show you all right now is the. Let's go to Canvas. I want to show you all the announcement that I made. And let's kind of review that. Let's go over it. Let me also share my screen here. Let's share. All right. View tab. Okay. Let's see here. Hopefully, am I on the right one? Okay. Yeah. Looks like I'm in the right one. Perfect. Okay, so we are here on the syllabus, ladies and folks, ladies and gents, folks, ladies and gents, rather. Okay, so let's go here to week 6 updates and announcements. Now, so I've spoken to some of you already, and what's first of all, I have to apologize. I just got back from an HBCU trip, an HBCU college tour, um, all the way out on the East Coast, and it is taking me the longest time to just kind of recalibrate, reset, and to readjust. So I know that if I'm feeling like this, then man, I can only imagine how you all must be feeling, especially since we did not have an in the class with CAG session last week, especially because we combined kind of 2 weeks into one announcement, weeks 4 and 5, and we just generally did not have any contact. Um, it's taken me a while to actually kind of get right on back on track. So again, like I said, I can only imagine how it is for y'all. The purpose of tonight's session is so that way we can kind of close down that gap, so that way we can reset and recalibrate together. I feel like if we do that together, then we might actually it might actually help us both out. So let's start off with our announcements, our updates and announcements. I know some of you might have actually seen a couple of, it was almost like kind of double dutch, like where you like, okay, okay, wait, hold on, wait, there's the announcement. Wait, no, where did it go? Okay, wait, oh, wait, there it is. No, wait, oh. So the announcement that I had originally scheduled needed to be updated, and it was not ready to go out. So my apologies for the double dutch game that was kind of going on, that we were all kind of unintentionally playing here. But earlier this afternoon, you all should have actually seen the real deal Holyfield, as we used to say as a kid growing up, when I was a kid growing up. Our actual week 6 updates and announcement. And so there are a couple of things that I want to put on your radar for today, for today's YouTube live session, but really for the next week and a half or so. Okay, since today is Thursday. The first announcement that I want to make is all of you, each and every one of you who is in my English C1000 class or my English C1000E course, all of you will have an extension on your writing assignment number 2. I have pushed the essay all the way back 1 week. Okay. Again, this here was more so, selfishly speaking, for my own kind of sanity to kind of recap, to recalibrate. And also, again, me kind of thinking that if I needed a kind of recalibration after a week of nonstop touring, and not being in contact with my students, then I can only imagine how they're kind of feeling right now. And by the way, folks, let me just say right now, for those of you all who may have had dreams of becoming a rock star, a rapper, an R&B singer, a pop star, or so like that, or just general dreams of living that tour life. Let me tell you, folks, as your friendly neighborhood professor, it is not for I at all, not in the slightest. We were up super duper early and we did not come back in until late at night, folks. And this was after we had moved 2 different time zones. Let me tell you right now, Professor Cag is not about that tour life. I'm sorry. I am certainly not about that tour life, folks. Give me one stationary, stable location, and I will be perfectly fine. Professor Cag could not have made it as a rock star. I would have been singing off of one street corner every day if that were the case. Oh man, thank y'all for indulging me in my fantastic um, um, humor and imagination here, folks. Let's get back to our regularly scheduled program. So the next announcement that I have for y'all is your midterm exam. It will be next week. Um, it is scheduled for it's due the 26th. However, I'm going to give you all until the 27th because I pushed back your writing assignment number 2. The way that I originally had it structured in our course schedule is your writing assignment number 2 was supposed to come the first, was supposed to come first, and then it was going to be followed in the following week by your midterm exam. However, since I pushed the essay back, I want to also to just kind of move that date for the midterm exam due date over by 1 day. Okay, so that'll at least give you all kind of one extra day to complete the exam. You can complete the exam as early as this Sunday because it's a part of the readings that are connected with week 7. I will make week 7's modules available this weekend. So that way it'll give you some time to kind of, at least kind of review the material for week 7. And week 7 is actually not too extensive. It's an introduction into Jennifer Government, the book that we'll be transitioning to. And also I'll give a lecture on the corporation on that day, during that week. So you all will have at least a couple of terms and concepts from the week 7 readings and resources, but the majority of the midterm exams questions will be focused on weeks 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, week 6 doesn't have that much going on in it. It's simply your 2 in-class activities, the discussion board, and also the writing assignment, I think, is posted there. And then you have the midterm question submission folder. So that there's not going to be very much information that we're going to tap into or that we're going to use for the midterm exam from week 6. So it'll mostly be a quiz, be a midterm that covers the material from weeks 1 through 5. Okay. And that will be due October 27th. That's a Monday. I know it's a little bit off of our beating schedule, but again, I wanted to give you all just an extra day, a day that was not the same as your writing assignment number 2's due date. Okay. And it will actually cover, if you study, here's the thing. As an instructor, I'm not into trying to play got you, right? I'm not trying to expose anybody for, um, um, anything that they're for being something that they're not. I'm not trying to get anybody with tricky questions. I'm not trying to be witty with my questions. I am simply looking to see who read and took notes and who did not. That is precisely the way that I have composed the questions on this midterm exam. And when I say that I composed it in a way that shows me who's done the readings and who's taken notes versus and who has not. Um, uh, Whatever the scores are that you get on this midterm exam, if you're not passing, you will receive an email from me immediately uh, after I finish grading it, inviting you to office hours. Okay, so you not passing this midterm exam, it will be open book, it will be open notes, and you all will have the opportunity to kind of show um, essentially everything that you have taken notes on, right? Really, the folks who are the most organized will do the best on this quiz. I'm asking notes from the PowerPoint. I'm asking notes from the readings. I'm asking notes from the modules, starting at week 1 all the way through week 5, essentially. Although I think the material would just quite simply, and the time span that we actually have is going from week 1 all the way through week 7, as I mentioned earlier. So that's essentially where all of your materials are going to come from. The only thing that's not on Canvas, and actually, no, even that's on campus. The readings from writing arguments, even those are actually available on Canvas underneath, I think, modules starting in module week 5, right? So there are only 2 chapters from that book that we will be um, um, going over on our that we'll see pop up, the concepts of which we'll see pop up on our midterm exam. But for the most part, it's going to be focused on the readings, the PowerPoints, and the modules. Weeks 1, concentrating primarily on weeks 1 through 5. Um, Although it will cover all the way through weeks 1 through 7. Although we have no information for weeks for week 6. Um, Week 7, there'll be just some like kind of basic, very rudimentary terms that you can actually use there. We'll only be introduced to a few of them for week 7. Okay. Questions so far? Let me go and look back over here at the chat. Jojo, I see you laughing. What? I don't. I must have actually said something funny, or is it just my face online? It's probably my face online. Any questions, comments, concerns, emotionally justifiable outbursts? Laughter is certainly acceptable. The midterm is open book and open note size. Well, yes, that's correct. So you all can actually use the modules. You could use the notes that you took on the modules. I would certainly use the notes that you took. I would actually I would take notes. I would certainly take notes on the modules. Um, I know that they're there, so you can like kind of go back and reference them at any point in time that you'd like, right? But the point of like making notes, I think, in an online class, folks, it's definitely different from a traditional face-to-face class, right? Although some of the features may actually pop up um, in from a traditional face-to-face class in an online class environment. One of the ways in which I would certainly take notes, or one of the techniques that I would incorporate into my larger strategy of taking notes in my online class is I would make connections across the texts, across the various readings that we have, right? So I'm not sure what your chosen method of note taking strategy may actually be, but like let's say for example, if it's Cornell notes, right? You kind of draw a line right down like on the left side of the paper. Sometimes some folks choose the right side, sometimes some people choose the middle, whichever one you're comfortable with. And I would have a section in that entire paper where I would just write connections, right? And I would just quite simply write out whatever the text is, draw a line, and then connect it over to either the film, the essay, the reading, right? I just kind of make some notes in like its own little box where it's just like a kind of connection box. Um, that's where I would kind of put down a lot of my thoughts and my ideas about connections that I'm able to make between and across the texts, right? Um, when you write your notes and you write your notes to like specifically make connections between the texts, and again, like I said, this kind of works in both the traditional face-to-face class and also an online class. When you write notes to make that are focused on connections between the texts or between concepts in the texts, that you're able to understand or comprehend rather what either text is saying, right? Or rather, you're able to comprehend or make a connection with the point that's being displayed in the lecture or in the PowerPoint. Okay, it makes a big difference when you write your notes from the standpoint of how does this connect with something that we discussed earlier, right? So I would certainly kind of consider that as you're moving forward, taking notes. Um, as a strategy for how to take notes because the other reason why is not just for the immediate kind of local reason, right, where you're able to make connections and comprehend um, the material that you're reading, but when you write those notes, it gives you a way of identifying or kind of framing what was discussed, the topics that were discussed, and how they relate to other texts in previous weeks. Excuse me. So sorry. Um, if you're able to do that, right, to kind of give it a very clear cut frame or like to understand what was being discussed, during this note taking session versus this note taking session, your ability to kind of frame it helps you to study. It helps you to go back into your notes and to identify what key components, what key ideas and insights um, you might need to kind of focus in on in order to help prepare you for the midterm exam, right? So just a quick word on the midterm exam and taking notes to study for it, right? I would certainly study. The thing that I'm looking for here are terms and concepts, right? For the PowerPoints and for the readings, terms and concepts. Okay. When it comes to the modules, I'm also looking for terms and concepts, right? However, what's also included in the modules are also film, right? Video clips and things of that sort. So in that case, um, like for example, there's the Riz's Tao of Wu that's posted under Module 1. And then there's also the Multiple Intelligences YouTube, or excuse me, sorry, TED Talk, right? That's posted up there on YouTube from Howard Gardner. In the Riz's Tao of Wu, focus heavily on the characters, okay? The characters, also like the major concepts and terms. The 12 jewels, right? Knowledge, wisdom, understanding, freedom, justice, equality, food, clothing, shelter, love, peace, and happiness, right? Those are like the 12 jewels, okay? Knowledge of self, right? Wisdom, okay? Those are like the concepts, right? Chili Wop, the RZA himself, right? Uncle Hollis, right? Think about the characters and then the major terms and concepts that you're introduced to in the RZA's Tao of Wu. When it comes to the YouTube videos, you want to certainly consider and take notes on the terms and concepts. Again, if you kind of peep it now, right, there's a kind of running consistent theme. Always take notes on the terms and concepts, right? But then also too, what Howard Gardner gives us is in at least in his YouTube video, his TED Talk. What he gives us in that TED Talk are major theories and concepts, right? So the major theory and concept of his TED Talk is the idea, the notion of multiple intelligences, right? Now, he'll give you the term and concept after he introduces like the grand concept, right? The umbrella term called multiple intelligences. Then he goes through all eight intelligences, right? He gives you the examples too as well. Pay close attention to those examples because I may actually ask you all to demonstrate or to identify which category this particular example may fall in, right? So that's how I would certainly look at like the film or like the visual clips that are actually provided online, right? Is visual clips are great because they introduce you to terms and concepts and they introduce you to examples, right, of those terms and concepts. So that's how I would certainly pay very close attention to those clips. Okay. Hopefully that helps. If it does, show me some love in the chat. Give me a thumbs up, a like, even a subscribe, folks. I get absolutely no money. I have 17 followers, people. So, hey, now we got one heart. Yay. Two hearts and a 100. It's the most activity my channel has ever had in life. Office hours this week, folks. That is so my office hours are back on. Thank you, Jaden. I appreciate it. Office hours are back on. I know last week again I was living that EXO tour life, and it was not for me. But what made me so sad was that I had to reschedule a couple of office hours. Thankfully enough, I was able to reconvene with those folks this week. Office hours will continue on as normally scheduled this week and next week. So please, if you have not yet sat down with your friendly neighborhood professor, click the link, select the time, pick a date, and let's make sure to meet online on Zoom so that way we can connect. And if you've not yet introduced yourself to me, if we have not met, then office hours is a great time for us to meet. I'd love to answer any questions and hopefully give you all some key tidbits and insights that you can use to help you to navigate your way through the course for the rest of this semester. Okay. Key upcoming dates and deadlines. Discussion board post number 6 is due this Sunday. It is indeed the inside job. And I have to give a special shout out to Isel. She has been on it from the start. She said, Professor Cag, discussion board number 6. I kind of sort of think that you want us to watch this movie. She was using great context clues and critical thinking skills all at once just to kind of say, Cag, you didn't actually post up the video. How am I supposed to watch it? So y'all definitely show some love to Isel. I was able to actually, once I got my feedback settled down on the ground, I was able to kind of find a free copy of the Inside Job on YouTube, which should be visible and accessible right now on our YouTube underneath the discussion board 6 post. Okay, so please definitely check that out. And then there are a series of critical reflection questions that you are able to view on the discussion board post number 6. Okay. Also, too, as I mentioned earlier, our rhetorical analysis on nickel and dime is pushed back by 1 week. It will be due October 26th. This week's focus, similar to last week, is going to be on rhetorical analysis. So consider this a little bit of a bye week, right? When I say a little bit of a bye week, I mean that I'm not putting any more or additional readings on you. Just go back and read what it is that you either did not read or didn't really quite understand from last week's readings or week 4's readings. Okay, starting from week 4 and week 5, that's really where the foundations are laid for the rhetorical analysis. Okay, in week 5, you also have a very important module series, okay, under week 5. That was pretty ambitious. It was a very ambitious module series. I have, if I must say so myself. Let's get to it. Week 5 starts out with how to write a rhetorical analysis PowerPoint. This will certainly be on your midterm exam, especially how to write a thesis statement. Okay. This is probably the most important PowerPoint this entire week or for this entire unit because it introduces some of the major core concepts of the rhetorical analysis. And it also gives you some very specific and explicit techniques that you can employ when you're writing, when you're ready to write your assignment, when you're ready to write your rhetorical analysis for Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed. The reading right underneath the PowerPoint actually comes from our writing arguments book. I was able to make a photocopy of the entire chapter and I just posted it up. So that way you all won't necessarily have to buy the book, but you all can have access to the readings, right? The key readings and the key chapter. Okay. But if you are like myself and you just love to have a tangible book, rent it. Okay. Rent the book, go to Chegg, go to Amazon, rent the book. All right. You can do an electronic copy. I actually prefer to have the physical hard copy in my hand. And I also believe that our bookstore offers a purchase or rental option. So you have a few different options if you don't already have access to this particular book. Okay. But I'm assuming that at least all the folks here online are alive right now. You all have the book, right? If I'm betting money, I wouldn't lose my house betting on y'all, right? I'm teasing, folks. I absolutely know that y'all are ready to rock and roll and you all are prepared. I've talked to all of you who are actually on here. So I'm very, very happy, very proud of you. Next, what the way that I want to actually start off. So the readings and the PowerPoint are really there so that way they don't get buried in the information that's provided with this introduction into rhetorical analysis. Okay. So this here is kind of like the meat and potatoes of this entire unit right here, right? This PowerPoint on how to write a rhetorical analysis and then writing arguments, chapter 8. It's actually a really, really um, well-designed chapter. And it's also a chapter that gives you like a lot of charts and a lot of examples. So that way you can kind of, kind of chunk the information better than as if it were just like a straight text. That's part of the reason why I have such a difficult time giving up this particular book. This book is expensive, y'all, but it has one of the best designs that I've seen for a book on rhetoric. Outside of a book that I actually used to teach that was it was actually written in a like a kind of comic book form. It was pretty cool. It was neat, but it was a little bit for my folks who didn't kind of garner information like that from comics. It tended to be a little unorthodox, right? So I stopped using that book a little while ago, but it was certainly cool. It's called Understanding Rhetoric, certainly the coolest book I've ever taught. When we get to the intro to rhetorical analysis section, this is kind of your how would I describe it? This is your overall, or excuse me, your online introduction um, into rhetoric and rhetorical analysis. Okay, so for this section here, what what I'm looking to do is just to introduce main terms and concepts. So let's dive right on in to the introduction to rhetoric, so that way we can kind of really see and unpack what it is that we're doing here. So here I'm giving you the formal definition of rhetorical analysis, and then I'm giving you chapter 8, right? Again, so you'll kind of see what I mean when I say I didn't want for this information that I have pilled out at the top, or pinned up at the top, I didn't want it to get buried. Even though this is on the first section of the first post, it's very easy to kind of like run through this and to kind of miss it, to not actually read it. So I decided to pull the entire chapter out and make sure that you all see it. So that way you all can make sure to study it because it will show up on your midterm exam. This is the understanding written arguments reading, which is a zip file. Now, this here is actually like the second coolest thing that I've actually seen on the second coolest chapter I've ever had the chance to actually read on rhetoric. Um, this particular text introduces the terms and the concepts in a very easy to understand kind of method, or an easy to understand kind of way. They bold the definitions and then they kind of give you the actual meaning of the term itself, and then they follow it up with more examples. This is just quite simply meant to reinforce the foundation that's laid. Me including this particular chapter is meant to reinforce the foundation that's laid in Writing Arguments, chapter 8. Okay. Um, the really cool thing about this particular chapter is that I used to use it in my face to face classes. I actually like to use this chapter as a way to do a fun game that I have yet to actually figure out how I can do online. I used to have a game called, it was very uniquely and creatively called Study Hall. Um, and I would have my students create 10 questions and answers that were based on the reading from the Analyzing Written Arguments reading. And you could only create a text, excuse me, you could only create a question as long these were the rules and the parameters of the game. You could only create a question that was based on the readings, and the answers of which can only be found in the readings themselves, right? You can't like magically interpret it or anything like that, right? But the really cool thing about it was that I also taught my students how to engage in critical thinking with this text here, right? Or excuse me, with this assignment. Let me actually go here. So you'll see what I mean here in just a second. Let me scroll down to the in-class activity submission form. Okay, so here, right, you'll see, right, complete readings 4 and 5 is outlined in the course schedule, right? Use the chart below, which is called Bloom's taxonomy, to create a set of 10 questions and answers based on the Understanding Written Arguments readings, excluding any readings entitled the Silko readings. And you'll see that those of you who've read through Understanding Written Arguments, you'll see that there's certain sections in there that are entitled like the Silko readings, right? I don't want you to actually read that or to include questions about that, right? The questions should be divided as follow: 3 easy, 3 medium, 4 hard. Okay. Now, this is how I used to actually teach critical thinking to my students. Okay. Um, Easy questions are best composed while using this chart down below, which is referred to and known as Bloom's taxonomy. Now, Harold Bloom was a cognitive psychologist who really used to kind of develop, or excuse me, who really studied um, the development of literacy in children. Now, part of what he was well known for was this concept that he developed through his critical observations called Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy was a chart that he created with a list of active verbs that demonstrated an individual's development, their cognitive development, up this kind of cognitive ladder, otherwise known as Bloom's taxonomy, right? And so the first step in that series is what's known as knowledge, where the individual can identify and recall information. Now, let me just kind of give you all an extra Scooby snack of information here for a second. Remember earlier when I said um, when you take notes, especially in an online class, you really want to focus on making connections between texts, right? Let me give you an example right now of what I mean by that. If you remember back to Howard Gardner's essay in his TED talk in week one on the multiple intelligences, part of the point that Howard Gardner actually makes is that the problem with education and really the traditions or the ways that we kind of assess, who's smart and who's not smart, right? Or the ways in which we assess intelligence is based on the way that an individual recalls or can remember information, right? How much it's based on how much information they can retain and recall and kind of recount in a logical or verbal way, right? Or even in some cases, right, a logical mathematical way as well as a verbal way. And so part of his critique lies in that the danger in assessing for Howard Gardner, the danger in assessing an individual's intelligence just quite simply based on their logical mathematical skills or their logical verbal skills, it only assesses, it's very limited. It only assesses like a limited scope of that individual's ability of that individual's intelligence, right? And so for him, he also takes umbrage or finds that there's a problem with how it is that we even define intelligence. For Howard Gardner, he wants to challenge some of the assumptions that lie at the heart of our traditional definition. And in doing so, he's put forth his own definition, right, which is based on his scientific research, um, where he defines intelligence as one's ability to recognize patterns in a variety of different ways. The issue that he takes with the usual way that we assess one's intelligence is best understood if we actually kind of have this framework of Bloom's taxonomy. In other words, what um, Howard Gardner is kind of critiquing the modern education system for is basically for only assessing an individual's intelligence based on level one of what Bloom's taxonomy would call their ability to identify and recall information, otherwise known as the knowledge level. Right? Just a fun, interesting kind of Scooby snack for you all. This is yet and still the reason why I historically did not do very well on tests because I was certainly kind of spoon fed a good diet of my necessity, my need to actually remember information. And that's not how you take tests. Moving on, though, folks. So, level one and an easy question, right, will do indeed just that, right? It will assess your ability to recall information, right? So, the who, the what, the when, the where, right? Even how, or it might actually start off with a question that has you describe, right, or that has you to define, right, what is the definition of rhetoric, right? So if you're trying to come up with a set of easy questions, you certainly want to use these sentence starters down here, right? If what you want to do is listed in this section, this row above, right? The sentence starters, right? So if you want for the people who are going to answer your questions to define, if you want them to fill in the blank, if you want them to list or identify, if you want them to label, right, a diagram or so like that, right, then you want to use one of these questions here from section one. If you want to kind of move up the scale a little bit, still within the easy realm, right, in the easy question, then you can assess for their comprehension skills, right? And that refers to an individual's ability to organize a selection of facts and ideas. Okay. So this specifically manifests in the form of creating charts, right? Or kind of matching or, kind of um, listing out the components of a multi-component or a multi-pronged feature, right? A multi-pronged concept, right? So like, for example, when we go back to the rhetorical situation, you'll see that is a concept that has multiple parts to it. If I wanted to assess your level of comprehension for that diagram there, then I would have you list out the different components of that dialogue, right, in its proper order and its proper placement. If you want to actually kind of take it a step further, and you want to kind of kick it up the scale a little bit, right, then you can actually go towards the realm of what Bloom's taxonomy is referring to as the application of knowledge, rules, and principles. Otherwise, what the RZA actually refers to, again, going back to the connections, what the RZA actually defines as wisdom, right? So you can consider level one, right? Or like the easy questions to kind of be in the realm of assessing your knowledge, right? That's kind of one and two combined, right? The medium questions sections are kind of assess on the scale of 3 and 4, right? Which assesses an individual's ability to apply the rules, facts, and principles, and which also assesses an individual's ability to analyze, right, larger components and break them down into larger concepts and break them down into smaller components, right? So those are medium questions. That's where you have to list and describe, not just list through recall or memory, right? But rather you're going to list and describe, right? Or identify the parts and features of the concept of the rhetorical situation, right? Or the rhetorical triangle. Okay. Um, you can also assess an individual's ability to understand or to analyze, sorry, not understand, but to analyze a particular concept through comparison or contrast questions, right? You can also assess their ability to analyze, right? Section 4, by assessing by asking them for a question that demonstrates through strong concrete evidence whatever the concept is, right, or whatever the claim may actually be. So, like for example, um, you know, uh, uh, an example of pathos um, might refer to, or what is an example of pathos, right? That would be an example of a medium question, right? Give me an example of logos, right? Give me an example, or what's an example? Identify an example of characterization, right? Identify an example of one of the components of characterization, right? Identify an example of one of the components of voice, right? Those are all like the kinds of questions that we would ask that are in the medium range of questions, right, that come from sections 3 and 4, right? Our ability to apply knowledge and our ability to analyze knowledge, right? That is to say, to break it down into its simpler or smaller components. When we start to get into the hard realm, that's when we begin to ask questions of synthesis and questions of evaluation. So, questions where you're looking to make connections, right? So, again, right, this kind of goes back to one of the notes, one of the things that I said earlier about when you're taking notes, you want to actually kind of make connections between the various texts, right? If something that you're reading reminds you of something that you've read before, right, or from another text that we've read, or another film, or um, um, clip that we may have actually viewed here in the class, then boom, write down the section in your notes, in your note-taking tool, right, or your notebook. Write down a section in there where you can include connections, right? So those connections there are vitally important because they will help you. It's especially for the midterm submission questions. They'll help you to create your questions about how these two things here are related, right? So, for example, one question that you can think of, or excuse me, that might actually kind of come from the synthesis section here, right? As synthesis is defined as combining ideas to form a new whole, right? One question that you might actually think of is, okay, so what does Aristotle call the combination of, um, you know, the use of artistic appeals to logic, artistic appeals to emotion, and artistic appeals to credibility, right? Uh, the answer to that question would, of course, undoubtedly be rhetoric, right? Look at me, heck, I'm giving you guys answers to some of the questions already. Let me stop giving you all examples right now. Then I won't have any more quiz questions. But for the synthesis question, right, you want to think about this like from the conceptual standpoint because you're moving up the higher orders of critical thinking, right? So one of the things that you might be able to kind of do is to create, right, a thesis statement for a rhetorical analysis of um, Alan Johnson's The Social Construction of Difference, right? Now, where you would get this from is specifically from the writing how to write a rhetorical analysis PowerPoint, right? You might even see a question like this on your midterm where in that PowerPoint it shows you how to write your thesis statement for a rhetorical analysis, and it works for any kind of text. If I ask you to write a rhetorical analysis for um, uh, the inside job, take for example, right? You should be able to actually do that using the formula or the format that's provided in the how to write a rhetorical analysis PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So those are the kinds of questions that I would ask there from the synthesis realm. Right. Now, when it comes to the evaluation section, this is the section where I would actually, well, this is the section that's defined as developing opinions, judgments, and decisions, right? So this is probably a little bit more difficult to actually kind of assess, only because the responses cannot be captured in, like, say, for example, a multiple choice or a matching or true false or a fill in the blank. No, 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 no. The answers, or excuse me, the responses for a question that's assessing an individual's ability to evaluate a text or to evaluate a concept that we've discussed in our course can really only be responded to by a short answer. Okay, where you're actually using reason, logic, you're establishing your credibility, where you're actually applying some of the concepts otherwise known as rhetorical appeals, right? So I do want to actually kind of highlight that, just to kind of give you all those examples for you know, helping you to think through how to construct your questions and answers, right, for the submission form, which is due this Sunday. Okay. And to also, part of the other reason why I wanted to share that with you all is to also show a little bit of the background behind that particular assignment, right? That really is an assignment that is birthed out of, me coming up with a creative way to get the students to actually read and to also come up with questions that they might actually see on their midterm exams, right? I figure, hey, if you all actually kind of help to create the questions, not only are you more inclined to pass, but you're also more inclined to do at least some of the readings because you have to have something to base the question on, right? So that's really where the idea and the thinking of that particular assignment there kind of comes from. So please make sure that you all get that done, get that in by this Sunday. It is indeed due by 11:59 p.m. Okay. So now let's go back. Understanding written arguments. We're going to go back to the rhetorical situation. Okay. So I'm going to tell you right now. Okay. I repeat, I will not quiz you on this diagram right here. Okay. I am not going to quiz you on this diagram right here. I'm not going to do that. I will also not quiz you on this diagram right here, right? The owl rhetorical situation. There is one rhetorical situation that I am going to quiz you on, that will show up, I'm just going to give you guys, I'm going to give y'all the what I'm doing right now. Um, these are the proper terms that define the components of the rhetorical situation. So, like an example of a medium question, side note, right, might actually be list and describe or list and define the components of the rhetorical situation. There's an easy way to remember in your mind, at least within the context of this course here, there's an easy way to remember um, the components of the rhetorical situation, right? And that is the CREAM, this acronym here, right? It stands for not so much cash rules everything around me, right? But rather in a hip hop sense, it stands for context, rhetor, exigence, audience, and message. Okay. Those are certainly the terms that I will be assessing you on. And the visual will actually come from the PowerPoint. So if you take a look here at Write a Rhetorical Analysis to PowerPoint, let's take a look here once it pops up. This is the visual that I will assess you on right here, okay? So here you have this big triangle, right, which is representative of the context. Inside of the bigger triangle, you have a smaller triangle, right, which is at the top. You have the rhetor, who delivers a message to an audience, and that audience gives the rhetor feedback based on their ability or based on either their purchase or their comments, their reviews, right? And in this case here, this is exactly what you are doing with Barbara Ehrenreich, right? See, you all are right here for this essay. You all are right here in this category, right? You all are a part of the audience of her text. You all are writing this rhetorical analysis excuse me, the reason or the purpose why you're writing this rhetorical analysis is, in a sense, in a way, to kind of organize your thoughts in a critical manner, right, on the essay and Barbara Ehrenreich's attempts at using persuasion, right? So in a sense, you're talking back to not only the text, but really the author, right? The rhetor, okay? And so in this sense, that's why you see these two arrows that are pointed in either way. That's why you see this dynamic here going both ways, right? Because the author has already kind of spoken, right, in this way, but to some degree or another, the rhetor has to read the audience's responses, right? And their critical assessment, their critical um, um, perspectives on the text itself and the author's attempts at uh, uh, using persuasion, right? So this is the diagram that I will be assessing you all on, right? Where you have the rhetor delivers a message to an audience, the audience gives feedback, right? But even before we even get to this particular second triangle, right? What we have here is in this larger context, right? This larger social and um, cultural environment, this social and cultural milieu of things that are going on, right? Wrestles and tensions between people. There is something that pops up. There's something that happens to people, a bit of a problem that ends up kind of emerging, right? That creates a conundrum for the people, right? That problem is what we in a rhetorical analysis will call the exigence, right? Or the spark that starts everything from happening, right? The spark that gets everything started, right? That's what we call the exigence. Let's take, for example, right? Those of you who may have actually seen or heard of NWA's song entitled "Fuck the Police," right? That song, if we're using the film, which is a biopic, um, um, if we're kind of thinking about how that biopic depicts the origin of the making of that song there came as a result of one racist traffic stop too many, right? And just outside of their studio, right? From the artists who were supposed to be recording the songs. If you're going by the canonical history, then it was really an expression of frustration that was built up to a head, um, at least as far back as 1965, when we had the 1965 Watts riots, right? Moving on through the brutal crackdown for against um, the war on drugs, which also to extended and continued. It was prefigured in the 1970s, and then it continued. It really was established and continued throughout the 1980s and also the 1990s, right? If we're thinking about that larger context, right, that larger social and cultural history, right, and the history is very important. If people really, if people, if somebody who asked the question, right, because like if it was your first time kind of hearing that song, it'd be fair to ask the question, well, why are these guys saying "fuck the police," right? Like that's kind of those guys they must not like the police, right? There's something going on there. They're mean. Why can't they be nice to the police? Until right, you had actually heard of the history of the 1965 Watts riots, right? Or until you had heard about the history of the historical practice of LAPD members, right, particularly from out of the Rampart Division, um, taking gang members off, black gang members, and dropping them off in their rival gang members' neighborhoods. Sometimes they might be other black gangs, sometimes they might actually be other Latino gangs, particularly Mexican gangs. Um, and that was like what they considered to be, to some degree or another, right, like kind of fun, right? It was like a kind of playful act for them, but for some of these people it actually had deadly consequences for the victims of that kind of behavior. Well, because of that particular practice plus more, right, NWA decided to actually write the song "Fuck the Police," right, as really a kind of way to voice the frustrations and to give tone and tenor to a lot of the folks from around the neighborhood that they grew up in, um, who experienced police brutality and neglect. And instead of equal protection under the law, rather, had actually felt, it's extensive force, right, to some degree, and in some cases, right, even upon their very necks. So, as a way to kind of vocalize their frustration with it, they decided to exercise the First Amendment rights and took to the airwaves with a song called "Fuck the Police." Right? Context is what you call what I just laid out here, right? The history, right? Or the background that shows where this problem here started or where the problem emerged from, right? That is what you call context. And that is precisely what I would be assessing you all on in your midterm exams. Okay. I'd be looking to see who actually read through, who watched this YouTube live, one, and then who followed through with the instructions to actually memorize this chart here, right? And to also go back and to define each one of these terms, right? From cream, right? In a rhetorical sense, right? Cream from a rhetorical perspective, not from a hip hop perspective, from a rhetorical perspective. Cream is defined as context, rhetor, exigence, audience, message, right? Context refers to the environment in which the event or the speech, the text, right, was occurs. The rhetor refers to the author of the text. The exigence refers to the call or the spark for change, right? The audience refers to anyone who reads, hears, sees, or experiences that message within a specific context, right? And then the last or message refers to the main point which the reader is explaining, okay? Any questions, comments, or concerns so far? All right. Let's keep it moving, right? So here I'm giving you some more information about context. There's a video clip up here from Jay-Z. Jay-Z will actually teach us a lot about context. Jay-Z has a way of describing this concept of context through the use of several examples that are very clear cut and that also help to demonstrate it. You can watch it with captions right here by clicking on this link, which will take you directly to this video with captions. I believe that the YouTube version also has these same captions that are on there. Sometimes the connection is it works. Other times I'm not sure if it does. That's why I actually included it down here. Okay. This here is also to a further description of context and its features. Yes, you will be assessed on some of these key concepts and these key ideas right here in this section, right? Some of these key insights, right? So here, right, we actually have some of the key themes, central themes for Barbara Ehrenreich's text, right? Some key terms, right? Like specifically the corporation, right? And also too the concept of the conscious of television, right? So some of these things here, and then there's some critical reflection questions. Now you don't have to actually submit these, but write these and write the answers down to these questions, right? Because your answers that the answers that you actually write to these questions, man, they could go directly, they could be woven directly into your the context section of your writing assignment number 2. All right, folks. Next, there's a video here by Sean McLeod, which kind of tells you, it details for those of you who actually need a lot more detail on, okay, well, how do I actually write a critical summary? Right, this here is a great. It provides you with a great explanation of how to write, and also demonstrates how to write a summary very effectively. So you could certainly write it in this way, right? I just want to kind of show you a range, or you could also use the technique that I showed you all last week, which was the rhetorical précis, right? Um, I just want to kind of give you a range of different techniques that you could actually employ. You don't have to employ all of them, but pick which one. There are 2 that I've introduced so far. You can also feel free to look up on YouTube some of the other suggested videos that pop up after you finish watching the Sean McLeod one. You'll have a lot that'll actually provide you with some information, a good, well-rounded set of videos that'll teach you how to write a summary, how to write a critical short summary, right? And you want to actually utilize those techniques and those skills in your actual essay, right? Next, there's a section in this module here that shows you how to write a rhetorical analysis, right? The whole thing. Boom. Watch this video. Okay. Walk you through specifically like the how to compose the body paragraphs of your rhetorical analysis, right? So pay very close attention to how the speaker actually explains the structure. Next video actually highlights like how to arrange the ideas in a paragraph in a critical way. Okay, so again, it kind of builds off the first video that pops up on this page. Okay. Next, you actually have the things themselves that you are supposed to analyze, right? Barbara Ehrenreich's use of logos, her use of ethos, and her use of pathos. Let me tell y'all something. This is the best chart to use for your dialectical journals, people. I would certainly do the dialectical journal assignment in such a way that I would make it useful and make the most out of it for my writing assignment number 2 for the rhetorical analysis that's actually due this week, right? So, like for example, studying this chart here, here I see the types of definition, right? Theories, scientific facts, indicated meanings, literal or historical analogies, definitions, right? If you see any of these examples here in Barbara Ehrenreich's text, highlight them, right? Highlight them in one color. If you see any examples of her use or how she establishes her profession or her background, she talks about her family background or even her own work background, her work history, right? Then you want to highlight those quotes in another different color highlighter than your logos ones, right? highlight each of these examples, excuse me, in in one single in one color for each. Okay, doing it that way actually helps you to keep track of which quotes belong under which persuasive appeal category, right? And then from there, this chart here kind of gives you a way not only on how to talk about it, but also to the effects that it has on the audience. So you can identify in your analysis, hey, this is the type of effect that it's having on the audience, and then demonstrate through the use of like going back and pulling out specific words and the combinations that she's providing of her words. Got to get deep on this, okay? That's really what we're looking for. We're looking for what you consider to be too deep. I've heard my students say, I don't want to get too deep on something. No, no. What you consider to be too deep is the surface. That's exactly right where we start, right? So get too deep, okay? Get too deep. You want to get deeper than the surface? Start making connections between the various texts and the concepts that come from those texts that we've read over the course, okay? Right? And then talk about what the relationship is between those two, right? If y'all want to get deeper than the surface, okay? Just gave y'all a DJ Khaled major key alert right there. There's a .dlc version if you want to download it, okay? Excuse me, folks. All right, and then lastly but not leastly, we have a video on how to write an effective conclusion. So, ladies and gents, I want to I think I told y'all this story last time. I actually gave y'all some pointers on how to write the essay for essay number one. I told y'all about the time that my professor actually, I brought my essay in early and to have my professor actually read it. And what happened was he read it and he said, this conclusion that you have right here, he crossed out every other paragraph that I had on like this 5-page paper. I wrote over the page maximum. I was very proud of that work. Unfortunately, he did not share the same sentiments. He crossed a line that went from north to south, not east to west like you're used to, but from north to south. That means he crossed out whole pages on my essay. And I wrote over the page maximum. But he said, he left me with a paragraph, my conclusion. And he said, make this conclusion your intro, right? Sometimes, part of my reason in just kind of recounting that story, sometimes you may have to actually go back and look at your essay to see, did I write my essay all the way through and only to kind of make it clear what I was arguing at the end of my essay, right? That's a habit that I used to have as as a writer, right? As a student writer. So that's part of the reason why my instructor told me to like go ahead on and take that conclusion, my first draft's conclusion, and make it my intro and then rewrite my essay from there. And then write a new conclusion, right? Let me tell y'all, once I was finally able to kind of like, come back to my senses after being rocked from that unexpected cross out right there, talk about getting crossed over. Um, I was able to hear what he was saying and the reasoning why he said it. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. Okay. So when you take your and make your conclusion, your first paragraph, then you can rewrite your conclusion. You have a better sense of how you're starting the essay and how you're finishing it. You want to start as strong as you finish. So part of some of the insights that this particular video here will share with you are some other techniques aside from the one that I just actually shared with you that I personally love to use the most. It'll share with you all some other interesting techniques that you can work through. Okay. After this, folks, then we are indeed returning to MLA format. There are several videos that will walk you through the basics of MLA citation. Everybody should have an MLA properly formatted paper by this essay. You should also have a works cited, not references. In MLA, it's called works cited, I believe, all the way through until now, right? So you want to make sure that you actually have the works cited, because you're going to cite a bunch of quotes that don't come from you, they come from Barbara Ehrenreich. So we need to see her name at least in the Works Cited page. Okay. Follow the steps, and you'll see exactly how to format your essay in MLA format. Okay. And now we're getting on into the activity. So that's just about it, folks. I'm going to pause right here and just ask, are there any questions? Excuse me, any questions? Any questions on anything that we went over for this module from week 5? Good question, Isel. If it's something that you turned in for another class, yes. Okay. Um, if it's something that you've written for my class, um, like for example, so there's a little bit of nuance here. Okay. If you wrote it in a discussion board, no, you don't have to cite it. Okay. I'm not gonna press you. If you wrote it in another essay that you actually turned in for me, then yes, you do have to cite that. Okay. If you wrote it on like in our messages or something like that, no, you don't have to cite it. All right. Discussion boards, right? Dialectical journals, right? You don't have to cite those. If you wrote it like in a report or for another class, right? Or for another essay that you had to submit, then go ahead on and cite it. Okay. Does that make sense? Cool. Perfect. Absolutely. Any other questions? All right, folks. Well, if there are no further questions, then I will go ahead on and wrap this stream here on up. It's your friendly neighborhood Professor CAG. Thank you all so much for joining me. So please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And I will see y'all next week. I will be posting up a video for week 7 this Sunday. And you all want to keep an eye out for week 7's folder being posted and published. All right. Take care of yourselves and each other, y'all. I'll see you. Peace.